Black patriarch.
There is another class of colored people who make a business of keeping the troubles, the wrongs, and the hardships of the Negro race before the public. Having learned that they are able to make a living out of their troubles, they have grown into the subtle habit of advertising their wrongs, partly because they want sympathy, and partly because it pays. Some of these people do not want the Negro to lose his grievances, because they do not want to lose their jobs.
Drug addict.
Yeah.
Okay, he was a drug addict. He abused women. He abused men. This is disgusting. It actually grosses me out. Do we have no better examples to put forward in the Black community? When you think of the word justice, you think of George Floyd. I mean, how far we have fallen since Martin Luther King. Yeah. It honestly makes me sick. It makes me sick. It's so upsetting to me as a Black person to see what is coming out as representative of the Black community, what we are told we should be holding up. It's almost like they are trying to intentionally pivot the attention of Black Americans into celebrating degeneracy at every turn, whether it's talking about, civil justice. George Floyd is now the emblematic of civil justice. He's so brave. He sacrificed his life. I mean, there is something very sinister and very disgusting happening right now in this country in terms of how they are trying to pollute Black minds. And it goes all the way from the education system and critical race theory to these disgusting words. And I will call them disgusting because they are, and they are false. George Floyd died. He was a drug addict, period. Whether you have an opinion about whether Derek Chauvin, should have spent some time in prison, yes or no, we should all agree that this man is not emblematic of justice.
Break down the groups here on the right and show how disparate and fractured they are. I mean, the fact that Cruz hates Trump and Trump hates Cruz shows that we are by no means unified, and I wish we were more unified. As far as I'm concerned,
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Another recent survey shows that Joe Biden holds a wide lead among black voters in the Democratic presidential race. The survey also offers insights into the ideology of diversity within the black community. For example, 6 in 10 black Democratic voters identify as moderate or conservative. Biden gets 58% support among that group, compared with 14% for Sanders and 8% for Warren. The survey was done by the Washington Post and the nonpartisan research firm Ipsos. I think it's Ipsos. Okay. So, I'm really not too surprised by that survey because, we know that the black community historically is conservative when it comes to social stances on a lot of issues, particularly because of our religiosity. But when it comes to policy, we tend to be more on the liberal side because of the way in which we need to rely on laws in order to protect us from a repressive system.
The difference between freed blacks and enslaved peoples in the colonies is that freed blacks owned their own labor. That's pretty much the basic difference. They weren't under constant surveillance the way enslaved peoples were. They lived off of the property of the enslavers. But while they weren't under constant surveillance and they weren't legally owned, they didn't have the same rights and freedoms as other freed people. So there were laws in place just for them that restricted their movement, their work, their right to marry, their right to live in certain places. Freed people in the North particularly, do have access to education and literacy. So a lot of the literature that we do have from African Americans in the 18th century are generated in the North because those people have access to literacy and become very eloquent and literate for their own freedoms and liberties and have a lot to say about slavery and the contradictions they're seeing between the rhetoric and reality.
You had these close connections between the enslaved populations and the free black populations. They were living right beside each other. So you can be a free person walking along the street, shopping, and you can run into an enslaved person. And most of the time they did not speak, because there was a very sharply divided community between those who had and those who did not. I think Philadelphia, even more so than Baltimore, you saw that the communities, as they were growing alongside each other, were growing in very different directions. Families like James Forten did not interact with the enslaved populations. They were educating their children. They were planning to have them be a part of the future. They were building their economies. So what would they have been doing with people who could not read or write?
New York was one of the last states in the North to abolish slavery.
It's a somewhat complicated procedure. In 1799, a gradual emancipation bill is passed, which says that slaves born before July 4th, 1799 are slaves for the rest of their lives. But people born into slavery after July 4, 1799 will be emancipated. In 1817, another bill gets passed that declares that people even enslaved before 1799 will be freed on July 4th, 1827.
Finally, on July 4th, 1827, 28 years after the state's first emancipation bill, New York's African American community celebrated their liberation. In all, about 10,000 people in New York State were set free.
After emancipation in New York, the abolition of slavery in New York, the black population was made up of free African Americans. It was also made up of people who had escaped slavery and had come to New York, as well as those who had been manumitted from slavery.
Throughout New York, free African Americans established their own communities. Weeksville in Brooklyn and Seneca Village, later cleared to make way for Central Park, were among them.
My mother's family has worshiped in this church for generations. The lessons I learned here, the power of faith, the importance of community, have remained with me and sustained me in the same way the Black church has sustained the African American people from the days of slavery to this day.
The Black church was more than just a spiritual home. It was the epic center of Black life. Out of it came our Black businesses, our Black educational institutions.
The church gave people a sense of value and of belonging and of worthiness. I don't know how we could have survived as a people without it.
We had to have some individual and institutional armor in order to preserve our sanity.
One of the first blossoms of Reconstruction was the flowering of independent Black churches all over the South, where Black congregants answered to nobody but God.
They didn't believe we could do it. When you think a person is less than a man, less human, 3/5, as it says in the Constitution, then the opinion is you can't think, you can't talk, you can't write, you can't read, you can't do, but yet the church grew and the people prospered.
Over time, Blacks struggled to enter the mainstream of American life. They acquired property and personal holdings. Black entrepreneurs began to exploit markets for fellow Blacks as well as whites. By the mid-19th century, Thorny LaFawn became a real estate dealer in New Orleans. His fortune totaled $8 million in today's money. William H. Brown founded the first Black bank in Virginia. Junius G. Groves was born a slave in Kentucky, but when he went to Kansas, he became the country's largest individual grower of potatoes. And in Concord, North Carolina, Warren Clay Coleman received financial assistance from wealthy white businessmen to found his Coleman Textile Manufacturing Company.
It's a big piece of Houston's history, hidden in plain sight. Nestled in the area we now know as 4th Ward in Midtown, was a thriving Black community known as Freedman's Town.
They had to go somewhere, and so they were left to kind of fend for themselves.
So in marshy no man's land, they built a community to live freely.
The first time I walked along these bricks, I was very emotional. This is where my people decided that they would survive.
Holly Charles says its success came despite the odds stacked against them, something she highlighted in a powerful play she produced about the community back in 2017.
They built homes together, they had their own hospitals, they had their own music, they had their own way of life right here in Houston, Texas.
One of the more famous quasi-free Negroes was Frederick Douglass. He did ship caulking and did many other kinds of jobs, and he would go back and give his owner some money.
In 1853, Frederick Douglass warned his fellow Blacks, learn trades or starve.
Frederick Douglass is probably the best known African American of the 19th century, was a slave himself, escaped from slavery, became one of the most eloquent speakers against slavery.
It is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake.
To see a man like himself really rise truly from slavery, truly escape, truly teach himself to read and create an industry, become a businessman, become a speaker, and basically put his life on the line all the time and live to a ripe old age. It was just amazing to me in that century, in the heart of slavery and all the oppression that was going on. So I actually couldn't imagine how he was able to to do what he did and what he managed to achieve, and actually see the end of slavery, actually the abolishment, what he gave his life for.
The question is asked and pressed with a great show of earnestness at this momentous crisis of our nation's history. What shall be done with the 4 million slaves if they're emancipated? What shall be done with them? Our answer is, do nothing with them. Mind your business and let them mind theirs. Your doing with them is their greatest misfortune. They've been undone by your doings, and all they now ask and really have need of at your hands is just to let them alone. They suffer by every interference and succeed best by being let alone.
Reconstruction was an attempt to make sure that the former slaves, now free, would become part of Southern society, become part of American society. But as you know, there was all sorts of violence in Mississippi and other places in the South where individuals tried to keep blacks, not enslaved, because you couldn't enslave any longer, but keep them down, keep them suppressed.
White Southerners are angry about the loss of the Civil War. For those who lost property, their communities were decimated. They lost the lives of family members and loved ones within their community. Of course there's animus. The richest state in the Union has now crumbled, right? Parts of it have been burned. And so I think quite naturally there's a lot of anger. And Black people and Northerners, they're seen as the ones who are the creators of the downfall of their civilization.
One of more than a dozen African Americans to serve in Congress during the period known as Reconstruction, when the formerly rebel states were reabsorbed into the Union and 4 million newly freed African Americans were made citizens.
When you look at the radical, amazing changes that happened within a few years of the demise of slavery, there was a kind of irrational exuberance.
Gates says Reconstruction is one of the most misunderstood chapters in American history.
Black men could vote, and they were about to elect congressmen to represent them throughout the South.
I mean, you go and you ask people on the street who the first Black person was elected to the U.S. Congress, they're going to guess it's the 1960s, the 1970s.
And they would never guess it was Hiram Revels from Mississippi.
Hiram Rhodes Revels was born free and served as a chaplain to Black regiments during the Civil War. On February 25, 1870, he was sworn in as a senator from Mississippi, an office once held by Jefferson Davis, who left the Senate to become president of the Confederacy. Is this a big national moment?
Oh, it's a historic moment, and it's memorialized in the famous Currier and Ives lithograph that shows the first senator and members of the House of Representatives who were African Americans.
The famed printing house created this lithograph featuring the African American members of Congress, all of them Southerners, all of them Republicans, in 1872.
After the war, Republicans began fighting to ensure that recently freed slaves in the South have their rights. A year after Lincoln's assassination, the party passes the Civil Rights Act of 1866. They fight to make sure that black men have the same right to vote with new laws and constitutional amendments. But something had happened during the Civil War that began changing the young Republican Party. Government spending during the war made many Northern businessmen really rich. Gradually, these wealthy financiers and industrialists start taking more and more of a leadership role in the Republican Party. They want to hold on to power, and they don't think that fighting for black rights in a mostly white country is the best way to do that. Meanwhile, the South is resisting these new racial reforms, often violently. And most white Republican voters and leaders now feel that they've done enough for black citizens in the South, and it's time to emphasize other issues. So in 1870, the party basically gives up on reforming the South, deciding instead to leave it to its own devices. The region becomes politically dominated by white Democrats.
When neither candidate in the 1876 presidential election secured enough votes in the Electoral College to be declared winner, a deal was struck. Southern Democrats agreed to back Republican candidate Rutherford B. Hayes. In exchange, the federal troops who had protected black voters were withdrawn from the South. Black voting rights were gradually stripped away, and black representation in Congress faded. Reconstruction was over, and the Jim Crow era of segregation began.
In 1872, a young man set out on foot on a 500-mile journey across the state of Virginia. His name was Booker T. Washington, and he was heading for the Hampton Institute, a school that had been founded for the training of the freedmen and the freedwomen following the Civil War. Little did he know that he would become that school's most famous graduate.
He takes both agricultural courses as well as academic courses. He excels at both, but he's most taken by the philosophy that African Americans should try to build economic power through industrial education.
Booker T. Washington becomes the principal and leader of Tuskegee Institute in Tuskegee, Alabama, a school for African Americans, and creates it into something that no one ever saw before.
Under his direction, Tuskegee became one of the leading institutions of higher learning for African Americans in the country. His success brought him a great deal of national attention and launched him onto the lecture circuit.
He thought that it was best for African Americans to gain an industrial education and ideally translate that into land ownership, business ownership, and build up institutions of their own.
On July 4th, 1881, when Booker T. Washington opened the Tuskegee Normal School for Colored People, as he called it, in the little town of Tuskegee, Alabama, in addition to having little money to run the school, he had to convince the local white population that educating blacks would not cause them to leave the farms and disrupt the state's economy.
Booker was truly a people-oriented educator, and he saw the tremendous need for the developing black colleges to quit imitating the European universities and the American universities on the eastern seaboard at that time, which have now changed. Many of them have now taken on many of the characteristics that Booker sought, and to educate people in ways that would help them develop, earn a living. He never sneered at career education, as some people do. Well, Booker took a very practical, kind of hard-headed look, and he took the view, as do most people who view people in the round, that earning a living is a part of living, and that black people need very much to have the kind of education that enables them, yes, to answer the important moral and ethical and philosophical questions, yes. Chapel was required here, and he brought in the best speakers from around the country. But equally important, to know how to make a living, to understand the economic system, to make it work for you, not to be ashamed of earning money, to only be ashamed of abusing it, and to be ashamed of being a beggar.
For early black conservatives like Booker T. Washington, founder of the Tuskegee Institute and the National Negro Business League, promoting black economic success and greater inclusion in American society was the goal, and the way to achieve those ends was through respectability, deference to authority, and strict adherence to an ethical, temperate, and productive lifestyle.
Mindful of this climate and convinced that Tuskegee would fail without white goodwill and northern industrial money, Washington seemed to turn a deaf ear and a blind eye to racial injustice and focused instead on the economic promise of his way rather than the civil or social rights of blacks. In a 5-minute speech given before a biracial audience at the opening of the 1895 Atlanta Exposition, he condensed his view of race relations in a striking image. In all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet as one as the hand in all things essential to mutual progress. The speech brought him instant fame. To white America, the Negro he seemed to be speaking for was the Negro it had been waiting for. Segregationists breathed easier. Industrialists with an eye on cheap labor flocked to give him support. And as he mixed with mighty tycoons like Andrew Carnegie and Robert Ogden, and even dined at the White House, the ex-slave from Hales Ford struck most blacks as the man who might indeed lead them to the promised land.
October 17th, 1901. The Atlanta Constitution. Tonight, just before 8 o'clock, a Negro in evening dress presented himself at the White House door and, giving his name, said that he was to dine with the President. Booker Washington has made several visits to the White House, and his face is known there, so he was at once admitted into the private apartment.
Within hours of becoming president, Roosevelt had wired Booker T. Washington, president of the Tuskegee Institute and the most powerful black man in America, asking him to come and see him. Each man wanted something from the other. Negro citizens had been brutally and systematically disenfranchised throughout the South. Washington wanted the new president's assurance that he would continue to appoint African Americans to federal jobs and resist those Republicans who wanted to crack the solid Democratic South by turning the party of Lincoln lily white.
Fast forward to the new century. By the 1920s, the Republican Party has become essentially the party of big business. This works out quite well for them as the economy is booming, but not so well when the economy crashes in 1929 and the Great Depression begins. Franklin D. Roosevelt and other Democrats are swept into power and begin dramatically expanding the size and role of the federal government in an attempt to fight the Depression and better provide for Americans. Republicans oppose this rapid expansion, defining themselves as opposition to big government, an identity that the party still holds today.
Garvey happened to read Booker T. Washington's autobiography, Up from Slavery. For the first time, the true humiliation and need of a great race spread all over the globe, yet ruled by white foreigners, struck the young Jamaican. Where is the black man's government? He asked himself. Where is his king and his kingdom? Where is his president, his country, and his ambassadors, his army, his navy, his men of affairs? Then and there he vowed, I will help to make them. Back again in Jamaica, and afire with a sense of mission, he founded a Jamaican version of Tuskegee, Universal Negro Improvement Association, or UNIA, but it didn't catch on. With Washington's example of self-help and his access to money in mind, Garvey turned to America. But by March 1916, when Garvey's boat docked in New York, Booker T. Washington had been dead for 4 months. No matter, Garvey, clearly knowing why he had come, carried a message that Afro-Americans would soon be ready for. Garvey's message about black unity electrified the masses, and for several years Harlem rang with his countless appeals for racial pride. Operating from this center of black life in America, Garvey took the Tuskegee doctrine of self-help, urbanized it, linked it with ideals of racial pride and black independence, even of nationhood, and sold it to the masses. By 1920, thousands had come under the spell of his personality, oratory, and vision. As a first step to his dream of a self-contained, independent black world of producers and consumers, to put money into black pockets instead of white pockets, he set up the Negro Factories Corporation to give loans and technical help to small business. Meanwhile, making the most of symbols, he draped himself and his movement in the trappings of nationhood, complete with a national flag and anthem, as all kinds of UNIA auxiliary units and Garvey himself paraded through the streets of Harlem.
Some of the early philosophy of the Nation of Islam is that black Americans should do for self. And what were some of the early economic plans to get the people in the Nation of Islam involved in trying to generate some income on their own and recirculate it in their own communities?
I must acknowledge that even that wasn't original for us, because Booker T. Washington also said, do for self, lift yourself. He said, pick up your buckets where you are. And if you have a skill, he said, if you can do the white mistress lady's hair, he said, then why don't you open a business and do hair for yourself, make money for yourself. So actually Booker T. Washington had that, a little head of the Nation of Islam.
Economic independence. Under the leadership of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the nation is further along than any other group of African Americans in their attitude toward and pursuit of self-sufficiency.
The brothers on the street selling their newspapers are the most obvious form of Muslim economic activity, but certainly not the only one. Their interests are on many levels, and in almost every black community there is a mosque in some form of Muslim establishment. The most prominent, the newspaper Muhammad Speaks, serves to inform, instruct, and link up the members spread across the country, and in addition, provides a source of income for maintaining and beginning other businesses. In addition to providing news with an international scope, Muhammad Speaks supplies Muslim and non-Muslim brothers with on-the-job training. Once more men are trained, the paper is planning to come out twice a week and ultimately daily. Only 9 years old, Muhammad Speaks is now sold in the U.S., Canada, the Caribbean, and Africa. Another aspect of Muslim self-development is education through the University of Islam school system, like this one in Chicago under the direction of Sister Beverly X.
The University of Islam teaches regular academic subjects. The thing that makes our school quite different is that we incorporate the spirit of Islam into the lessons and into the teaching. We also do not have the frills that are in the public school system. We eliminate the sport, the play, the rest periods, the snack periods, the free periods, all of these which give to the children nothing.
National Secretary John Ali.
Well, it is a desire and plan of Mr. Muhammad to make us completely self-sufficient, like other people are. Because the only way you can be independent, you have to be self-sufficient. As he says in good language that we all can understand, we have to take our stomachs out of the white man's kitchen. And so this is one of the significant things about Mr. Muhammad followers. We support ourselves. I mean, in the black community, there are very few or nothing that's supported by the black community, because we have not been trained to support ourselves. We support every other activities of ourselves. But the followers of Mr. Muhammad, we have supported ourselves, and that's why we're able to maintain our own private schools. We have our own farms. We have our own newspaper plant. We have our own bakeries and other things, because we do these things ourselves.
As we've seen in Ken Burns' Jackie Robinson documentary, number 42 is famous for being the baseball player who broke the game's color barrier. But off the field, Jackie Robinson also became a civil rights leader who aligned himself with the Republican Party. That was until the 1964 election season, where the rise of Senator Barry Goldwater caused him some serious concern.
Jackie Robinson retired from baseball at the end of the 1950s. He had a newspaper column, and he started to use that newspaper column initially to talk about sports, but then eventually to start speaking out about politics. He first becomes identified with the Republican Party in the 1960 election when he campaigns for the then Republican candidate Richard Nixon. Nixon ends up losing to President Kennedy, but Robinson remains politically active. He identifies both as an independent, but then eventually as publicly as a Republican. And as the 64 election campaign gets underway, he becomes increasingly concerned with the rise of Barry Goldwater, particularly the kind of extremist political rhetoric that he sees coming out of Goldwater in the Republican campaign. And he uses his newspaper column, Jackie Robinson did, to really argue against Goldwater's candidacy, both out of fear for what that could do for the Republican Party, but also what that could do for America.
With the advent of the civil rights movement, black conservatives were pushed even further to the margins. But for those who did retain their affiliation with the Republican Party, their political philosophy was generally defined by either a strong social conservatism or a strong opposition to government interventions in black life, or both. Those African Americans who did identify as Republican were often perceived as sellouts who were not committed to racial justice and empowerment.
Going into the 50s and 60s, race and the South returned to the forefront of national politics, with the civil rights movement attempting to end segregation and ensure blacks truly have the right to vote. The civil rights debate isn't a purely partisan issue. It's more of a regional issue, with Northerners from both parties supporting it and Southerners from both parties opposing it. Then, in 1964, it's Democratic President Lyndon Johnson who signs the Civil Rights Act into law. And it's Republican presidential nominee Barry Goldwater who opposes it, arguing that it expands government power too much. A massive switch-up takes place. Black voters, some of whom had already been shifting from the Republican Party, convert almost entirely to their new advocates, the Democrats. The white voters in the South, who had been staunch Democrats, start to really resent the big government interference here and in other matters like abortion rights and school prayer. Over the next 3 decades, whites in the South switch to the GOP, which makes the South an overwhelmingly Republican region.
That search for what they call manhood is among the Negro male's most urgent motivations. It is especially so with the young militants. They call it their search for identity, for dignity, in a world in which they have too long been dictated to by whites.
The first thing that we have to do is knock this wall down forcibly in order to confront the white power structure with our demands.
Who are the house niggers you're talking about?
Roy Wilkins, your Martin Luther Kings, your Whitney Youngs. They do not represent the aspiration of the brother who is standing out there on 121st Street and Lenox Avenue now, who doesn't even have 2 coins to rub together. I suggest that my good white, so-called good white friends should take this civil rights that they want to give me, they should keep it and give me money and power instead.
We're not interested in interracial housing. We don't want your neighborhood. We want ours to be just as good, see? We don't want a store in your neighborhood. We don't want you coming in our neighborhood and open up stores and exploiting us and then go home and throw a bomb if we move next door out in the suburbs. We don't want your schools, but we want our schools to be the highest and the best possible for our black progeny. See, what people don't understand, we are saying and we're not asking, you see? The die is cast, as I said. We're not asking. We're saying this is the way it's going to be.
Since Lincoln was supposed to have freed the black man 100 years ago, and today the black man, according to the government economist, has spending power of $20 billion per year. We feel that with the black man spending $20 billion a year, not setting up any businesses, not creating any industry, not creating any job opportunities for his own kind, he's not in a moral position to point the finger today at the white man and tell the white man that he's discriminating against him for not giving him a job in factories that he himself set up. If the black man has $20 billion, and these so-called Negro leaders are such geniuses that they can integrate white restaurants and integrate white factories and force themselves into that which the white man has set up, they should use this same ingenuity to show the black people how to pool our wealth and set up something of our own. And then we won't have to force our way into his anymore.
And he is beaming, Pat Nixon is beaming. One can't help but think back to 1960 when a tearful Pat Nixon was choking back the emotions. It was a totally different scene, of course, then. Here is possibly one of the most fantastic political comebacks in American history.
At age 56, after 22 years of political battle, Richard Nixon had become the most powerful man in the world. He envisioned nothing less than a new world order, with himself as its architect.
The greatest honor history can bestow is the title of peacemaker. This honor now beckons America.
Some aspects of black power are very disturbing to us because it means revolution, it means violence. But other aspects of black power are very constructive because it means that black people, they want to stand on their own feet. They want to have black banks and not just go to white banks. They want to have black businesses and not just go to the white businesses. And they should have, and they will have.
We should deviate from the written question format to the extent of permitting Mr. Roy Innes to come up here and make his statement for 5 minutes, and then we will respond to it and return to the other questions. Mr. Innes.
The order to desegregate America in a one-dimensional way. That this must be done exclusively through the means of integration. There were others of us that said that, coming in the mid-60s and to the present, and more so today, that interpret desegregating as moving to control societal instruments. We talk of community control, community empowerment.
Mr. Innes, would you describe the bill, which the so-called Self-Determination Act, which has been introduced into the Senate by Senator Charles Goodell, the Republican senator? What is the purpose of this bill? What does it seek to achieve for you?
It seeks to achieve a level of economic viability that is not now present in black communities.
How?
By the creation of a community corporation, which will be a centralized coordinating structure.
A single one for the whole United States, or
no,
one for each
in
town?
black communities. the definition of a community being by those individuals living there themselves. The idea is to have a planning instrument, an instrument that can catalyze business development. Something that is missing in our areas now is some instrument that we all can relate to, that membership is open to every citizen in our area.
When he first asked me to come aboard in late 1968, we had a meeting at the Pier Hotel at the transition headquarters, just the two of us.
That he that Brown is referring to is President Richard M. Nixon.
And he asked me to come aboard, and he'd said that at that time that one of the things that he was deeply interested in is what he spoke about during the campaign, black capitalism, we call it then. And he said, I want you as a young black businessman to carry that out.
Brown's tenacity paid off. He was able to make the MBE program what it is today, and was also instrumental in starting the North Carolina Institute of Minority Economic Development.
The fate of Lyndon Johnson did haunt Richard Nixon. He felt he had to demonstrate that most Americans still supported him. Don't get rattled. Don't waver. Don't react, he told himself as he went to work on a speech to respond to the protests. Insisting on writing it himself, he distinguished his supporters, the forgotten Americans, from the vocal minority in the streets with a new catchphrase.
To you, the great silent majority of my fellow Americans, I ask for your support. For the more divided we are at home, the less likely the enemy is to negotiate at Paris. Let us be united for peace. Let us also be united against defeat.
It was the most effective speech of Nixon's presidency. 80,000 telegrams and letters arrived at the White House. Nearly all supported him. His approval rating soared.
Can black people survive culturally and physically in America? Can we ever be a part of the existing white institutions? Or should we be developing our own? Can we as a people develop solutions to our dilemma fast enough to counteract the present rate of growth of the oppressive factors built into this society by institutional white racism? As black people, we must deal with the issue. Is it too late?
We believe in amassing the collective power of blacks, other minorities, all people, and progressive forces. We seek a radical change in our national priorities, a redistribution of wealth and power, and the creation of a nation of peace and human decency.
The National Urban League believes in a pluralistic, open society, one in which black people have the same range of choices and options as any other citizen. The Urban League's action programs are carried out by 100 affiliates across the country, and they serve the minority community that is in need of our programs and our community organization projects.
I am dedicated to the proposition that it is still possible to achieve genuine racial justice and meaningful equality among black and white Americans through the social and governmental structures we now have, modified as needed through the democratic process. I believe that the goal of an integrated society, nourished and formed by healthy cultural diversity, is still attainable.
I represent the Black Christian Nationalist Movement, and I state the Black Christian Nationalist Movement's position. We feel that it could very well be too late for the black man in America. Probably the next 5 or 10 years will indicate whether or not the black man can survive. Our struggle for survival is a very real struggle, and the white man has prepared genocide for black people. Unemployment, the black man is no longer necessary. Unemployment is going to be a way of life for black people. We are going to face increasing dangers and problems as the days pass, and we're totally unequipped as black people to deal with them. We're a part of a slave culture. We have no preparation. We have no black institutions capable of dealing with white racist institutions designed to serve only white people. We must deal with the problem that confronts black people by building black institutions, by understanding that only a separatist position is a viable position for black people. Any organization or any leader in America who today advocates integration is a foe and an enemy of black people and their survival in the coming years.
Many Americans, black and white, assume that quality education can occur only through integration, where integration has come to mean the destruction or closing of black colleges and institutions of learning, and black students enrolling in predominantly white institutions.
The Congress of Racial Equality is a nationalist, pan-Africanist organization of the Garveyite variety. We feel the survival of black America is threatened by racial schizophrenia that plagues a great portion of black leadership. Malcolm called this problem the problem of the house nigger against the field nigger. Its destructive ramifications exist yet today. Black masses are governed and led by an elite few who have split loyalties between their black and white families. These racial schizoids are leading us down the path of racial genocide through the propagation of forced integration and the calculated assimilation.
Opening statement of the Nation of Islam by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Go ahead, please.
It is too late to talk of integration unless we want to be lost in such integration. We have never been such thing as a white person unless the white man integrated and our family made us white. By nature, we are different two people.
It is interesting how everyone assumes that the pro-life movement in America began in 1973 with Roe versus Wade. But we who were around during the civil rights movement and struggle of the 1960s, we know that the first anti-abortion groups were organizations like the Black Panthers, the Nation of Islam, and other community organizations. These folks were speaking out against both birth control and abortion long before the contemporary pro-life groups of today existed.
Those whom we could not get rid of in the rice paddies of Vietnam, we now propose to exterminate if necessary, eliminate if possible, in the OB wards and gynecology clinics of our urban hospitals. Jesse Jackson, 1971.
Black people are the target of birth control, not because the ruling politicians like them and care about their economic equality, but because they hate them and can no longer use them in plantations and other cheap labor conditions. Muhammad Speaks, the Black Muslim newspaper, 1970.
I believe the entire question of abortions is just one more in the continuous series of events to eliminate the black population. Father George Clemens, Jet Magazine, 1973.
The abortion law hides behind the guise of helping women, when in reality it will attempt to destroy our people. Brenda Hyson, New York Chapter, Black Panther Party, July 1970.
In the 1960s, careful urban field research conducted by liberal social scientists culminated in a spat of thoughtful studies of life in large urban ghettos. Problems of poverty, joblessness, and family structure were highlighted, but so too were problems of crime, sexual exploitation, teenage pregnancy, alcoholism, drug addiction, and other forms of destructive behavior. The 1960 research studies made it clear that ghetto behavior, which was said to be ultimately destructive to individuals and families, was at bottom a problem generated by the systematic blockage of opportunities. This message is too frequently absent in many current journalistic and scholarly accounts.
Culture and economics are inseparably intertwined. Certain economic systems allow families to thrive. Thriving families make market economies possible. You cannot separate the two. It used to be possible to deny this, but it's not anymore. The evidence is now overwhelming. How do we know? Consider the inner cities. 30 years ago, conservatives looked at Detroit and Newark and many other places, and they were horrified by what they saw. Conventional families had all but disappeared in poor neighborhoods. The majority of children were born out of wedlock. Single mothers were the rule. Crime and drugs and disorder became universal. What caused this nightmare? Well, liberals didn't even want to acknowledge the question. They were benefiting from the disaster in the form of reliable votes. Conservatives, though, had an explanation for inner city dysfunction, and it made sense. Big government. Decades of badly designed social programs had driven fathers from the home and created what conservatives called a culture of poverty that trapped people in generational decline. Well, there was truth in this, but it wasn't the whole story. How do we know? Well, because virtually the same thing has happened decades later to an entirely different population. In many ways, rural America now looks a lot like Detroit. This is striking because rural Americans wouldn't seem to have very much in common with anyone from the inner city. The groups have different cultures, different traditions, different political beliefs. Usually they have different skin colors. Rural people are white conservatives mostly. Yet the pathologies of modern rural America are familiar to anyone who visited downtown Baltimore in the 1980s. Stunning out-of-wedlock birth rates, high male unemployment, a terrifying drug epidemic. Two different worlds, similar outcomes.
We didn't win a lot of elections back in the 50s, early 60s. But then in the mid-70s, conservatives figured out what we were missing, and that was the social issues. Traditional values and a lot of issues dealing with family, home, community. And we began to add that element to our political rhetoric.
And the perverts, and the liberals, and the leftists, and the communists coming out of the closet, it's time for God's people to come out of the closet, out of the churches, and change America. We must do it.
Some of the conservatives from the 50s and the 60s were uncomfortable with bringing the social issues into the arena.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political scientist, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me on this. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts you, it backfires. So you say stuff like force busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites.
In 1980, Reagan returned for a new presidential campaign. He was still calling for welfare reform, but now he was doing so as part of a much broader message. He talked of states' rights and of returning America to a better bygone era. While his message had a powerful appeal, to many African Americans, it seemed like a thinly veiled attack on the progress made since the Civil Rights Movement.
He runs on this campaign that's like, listen, we're gonna actually make America great again, and then implicitly in that is the idea that making America great means we basically have to kind of put black people in their place.
We are taking our country back. We're making it great again. Reagan was setting that tone, and black folk were saying, anytime Whitey Leaf's talking about taking their country back, you know what they mean. They're coming at us with intensity.
Suddenly, there's a new boy on the block. Not only did the Reagan victory diminish the power of the old professional black leader group, but a new black leadership force simultaneously started offering new and different solutions. The new blacks were immediately labeled conservative, and instead of debating them, name-calling was used as a frontline defense. But that tactic had limited success because they persisted.
This is really an historic opportunity. The economic and social advancement of blacks in this country is still a great unfinished task. The methods and approaches for dealing with this task have become familiar over the past few years, and they demand re-examination for at least two reasons. First is the effectiveness of these approaches has been ever more seriously questioned in recent years. There's growing factual evidence of counterproductive results from noble intentions. Some of that factual evidence will be presented here tomorrow. In addition, numerous political trends in recent years indicate declining voter and taxpayer support for these approaches to which some of the older and more conventional black spokesmen, in quotes, remain committed. The events of November 4th were only the most dramatic example of this. They were not the only example. Many social problems are worsening. Continued disintegration of families, rising numbers of broken homes, 1/3 of all black homes now. A skyrocketing unemployment rate among black youths, 5 times as high in the late 1970s as in the late 1940s. Runaway crime rates, of which blacks are the chief victims. There are more blacks murdered every year than whites in absolute numbers. There's also a threat of a permanent underclass whose problems seem immune to prosperity, to equal opportunity, or to the advancement experienced by other blacks.
Look, your man won. He won the election. But you have to ask yourself, was it really a landslide, or did Carter lose it? Was it a vote against Carter, or a vote for Reagan? Help us either improve our condition in the ghetto, help us improve our schools so we don't need to be bused, help us improve our housing so that we're willing to stay there, help us do for ourselves. What do we want? We want everything anybody else has. Are we willing to work for it? Yes. How can you help? Those of you who are going to control, those of you who are going to influence the next 4 years in our country. You can invest in minority enterprise. I believe in capitalism. I said earlier that I believe in capitalism. And you've got, ladies and gentlemen, the finest. I have become convinced. I'm not yet converted, but I've become convinced, as I've attended this session over this weekend, that you have the potential here among you to exercise a kind of influence that 4 years from now, those of us who are Democrats will say that the Republicans did better by blacks than the Democrats did.
I'm sensitive to the unique and sometimes difficult position in which you often find yourselves as black Republicans. What you're doing takes great vision and true courage. Under the superb leadership of individuals like your chairperson, Legree Daniels, black Republicans have been performing above and beyond the call of duty. The rest of us in the GOP are grateful for your commitment and deeply impressed by your tenacity. For too long now, black Americans seem to have been written off by one party and taken for granted by the other. And for the vast majority of black Americans, that's been a strictly no-win situation. Changing it will require a commitment from all of us. So tonight, I want you to know that the Republican Party stands ready and willing to reach out to black Americans.
There are social pathologies that are inhibiting black progress. They're really moral cultural problems that cannot be addressed by legislation. And I think that's going to create a lot of frustration for people because they'll want a political solution to a problem that's really moral and cultural.
My name is Dr. Walter Williams, and I'm an economist. I have spent much of my life studying the causes of poverty. I broke out of the North Philadelphia ghetto nearly 30 years ago, and so did most of my friends. But today, fewer young blacks are escaping places like this. I want to spend the next 30 minutes exploring the reasons why. For believe it or not, to a considerable extent, the government is the culprit. It is the government with its hundreds of billions of dollars. It is the government with its thousands of programs. It is the government with its endless good intentions.
Robert Whitson, president of the National Center for Neighborhood Enterprise. Do you think that Mr. Reagan's presidency has been a good period or a bad one for American blacks?
I think it has been good in some respects and not so good in others. I don't think his record is any worse or any better than any other president. I think he has done something, though, that would have an overall beneficial effect, and that is Mr. Reagan has said that the federal government is no longer to be viewed as a Moses to deliver black folks, or anybody.
Kay James has been active in the pro-life movement as a volunteer here in Virginia since 1978. She's worked in alternatives. She has worked in all aspects of the pro-life movement. She joined the National Right to Life Committee in May of 1985 as the Director of Public Affairs. She supervises outreach programs, acts as media liaison, and assists with legislative efforts. She's appeared on numerous local and national television programs, including Today, Nightline, and Oprah.
Reagan made good on his campaign promises by rolling back social programs and making significant spending cuts. His policies had immense consequences for America's already struggling inner cities, as the lack of federal support made the job of black civic leaders all but impossible.
Many of the cities where blacks have become mayors and so forth are nothing but garbage cans. Hell, who wants to be the mayor anyway of a garbage can?
A great deal of the misery that black America is confronted with today has been exacerbated during the past couple of years with the cuts in basic survival programs that poor people and disadvantaged people have come to depend upon.
Citizens of all ages in East Palo Alto appear to have lost confidence in their government's ability to eradicate drugs and gangs. The city and its police force were only created in 1984, but already its people are asking the county for help with law enforcement. Carl Sunken reports from the South Bay Bureau.
Even if they never use drugs themselves, crack cocaine may deny these black children a decent future. Because of the violence that surrounds crack, a large proportion of black families live as virtual hostages in volatile and unsafe neighborhoods. They fear for their children, and so far, there are no solutions. The concern is so great that 800 people have signed up to attend a conference at San Francisco's Glide Memorial Church. The three-day conference, which starts tomorrow, is a collective search for answers. Organizers thought the problem serious enough to call the conference the death of a race. Glide's pastor, the Reverend Cecil Williams, thinks law enforcement crackdowns like the one just announced for Washington, D.C., sweep up the victims as well as the dealers.
There'll be warfare. We will see large numbers of poor people, and specifically blacks, going to jail and to prison, and they will not have a chance to live, to have a productive life. By 1995, more blacks would have gone through the criminal justice system. We're predicting 70% at this time, going through the criminal justice system. Now, I ask you, isn't that the way to completely eradicate a race of people?
With crack causing so many family tragedies and draining so much money from city and county budgets, the question is, can this conference come up with some better ideas? Austin Longscott, News Center 4.
There's been a lot of talk about the class struggle in the black community and how, you know, the black middle class is moving further and further away from the interest of the black underclass, as it's called erroneously, I think, but called the underclass. First of all, I think all black Americans, and I've said it repeatedly, feel fragile right now.
Michael Jackson, with appreciation for the outstanding example you have set for the youth of America and the world.
When the dog bites, when the bee stings.
I'm very, very honored
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Remember my favorite things, and then I don't feel so bad.
That picture of them in the Rose Garden, it's sort of a moment of how accepted Michael was. That Michael was that, a conservative Republican president would want to be seen shaking hands with Michael Jackson in the Rose Garden at that time was profound.
As high as North Dallas. And as city leaders continued to neglect South Dallas, it became an inevitable breeding ground for drugs. Today, the police call it a war zone.
They told me
South Dallas. They estimate that the crack houses in South Dallas take in more than $500,000 a day. The drug to thousands of arrests, the police admit that they rarely capture the kingpins who control drugs in Dallas.
Joining me in the studio to give us some fresh insights on black involvement with the Republican Party are three black Republicans. When we decided to tackle this issue of blacks in the Republican Party, I had a bit of difficulty not just locating black people who were Republicans, but in getting the ones who were proclaimed Republicans to talk about it on camera.
Sure.
One gentleman said that he was starting a business, and having been identified as a black Republican before did not help him before when looking for a job, and he was afraid that it would hurt his business. Have any of you had any experience with that kind of discrimination personally?
Well, the black man in the southern area throughout the United States must look at the Republican Party with an open mind. When your mind is closed, then you can't see what's good for you or what's not good for you. There are a lot of things about the Republican Party that it's good for a black person as well as for a white person.
You can't deny that many blacks view the Republican Party as elitist, conservative, and racist, if not just non-caring about civil rights. With your involvement with the party, Mr. Brown, have you found that to be true?
We're simply saying that we must keep the door of opportunity open for our black community, and that's what we're committed to doing.
Earlier today, Clarence Thomas and his wife, along with President and Mrs. Bush and some 300 friends and family of Justice Thomas, gathered on the south lawn of the White House for the first of two swearing-in ceremonies.
So help you God. So help me God. Great pleasure. Thank you. Great pleasure.
Happy New Jersey rally was more than Bill Clinton's night. It was the Democratic Party, out of power for 20 of the last 24 years, confident that at last it's going to win.
You had a rap singer here last night named Sister Soldier. I defend her right to express herself through music. But her comments before and after Los Angeles were filled with the kind of hatred that you do not honor today and tonight.
The consensus is A, we must take back the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter or not whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street.
How many years have you gone without a job?
I can't think how long. It's been a long time.
Welfare reform.
By the mid-1990s, a drumbeat of media attention had convinced many Americans that people on welfare were either cheats.
With wigs and disguises, she conned welfare workers into believing she was 12 different people.
Or loafers.
Some people on welfare make more money than people that are working.
Why should we have to pay for you to sit at home, watch your soap operas?
The number of Americans receiving cash benefits had hit a record 14 million. And Republicans wanted radical change.
They create a culture of poverty and a culture of violence which is destructive of this civilization.
So how did a Democrat become the one to do away with this once sacred entitlement?
Today we are ending welfare as we know it.
If Walter Cronkite has been called the most trusted man in America, Rush Limbaugh has been called the most dangerous, and he's proud of it. On 400 radio stations nationwide, more than 7 million listeners a week hear Limbaugh lambasting liberals, railing against the homeless, beating up on feminists, gays, and those he calls peaceniks and environmental wackos. Unhappily, his critics say he's proof that bigotry sells. As you're about to see and hear, Rush Limbaugh is too big to ignore.
How did it happen? How did television news become so predictable and in some cases so boring? Few broadcasts take any chances these days, and most are very politically correct. Well, we're going to try to be different.
On one side, there are people like these college students who oppose Proposition 209, the measure that would end affirmative action in California. On the other side, people like San Diego contractor Michael Cornelius, who says affirmative action is unfair. He counts the damage from lost jobs.
Over the past 5 years, I've probably lost 15 to 20 contracts.
Contracts, he said, went to minority firms instead, a loss of $25 million for Cornelius. Proposition 209 would end all race and gender considerations in public education, government contracts, and hiring. Pat Ewing leads the opposition.
This will just devastate and gut all the laws necessary to have equal opportunity in the state of California for everyone.
Ward Connerly, with backing from the Republican Party, is point man in the campaign to end affirmative action.
When you give a preference to one American because of the color of his or her skin, or because of their national ancestry, that is discrimination.
The problem was racial quotas.
It is a war of emotion, with both sides saturating the airwaves. $3 million spent to persuade the 1 in 10 voters who remain undecided. Persuade them how to define fairness.
Don't be fooled.
I am pleased that this arm of Congress has taken the time to address the urgent problem of the social impact of music violence, a subject that we have been engaged in for more than 5 years in a relentless struggle to persuade the giant music industry to stop the production and worldwide distribution of violent, pornographic, misogynistic, gangster rap music. We want the industry to respect us like they do others. When Michael Jackson, the pop star, included some words in his album, They Don't Care About Us, that our Jewish friends considered anti-Semitic, they protested. Michael Jackson said 2 words, offensive to the Jewish people, kike me and hike me. And the Jewish leaders went to Sony. And the president said, well, it must have slipped through. but they protested, and Michael Jackson was taken off MTV and VH1. I applaud them. I wish our African American community and all communities, whenever any music is offensive to anyone, we should not have it take place in this society. We should respect everyone. We want the industry to treat our complaints with the same promptness and respected concern. I applaud the Jewish leaders for their swift action and have challenged our black leaders to do the same. Based on that episode, one can only conclude that the corporate gangsters in the entertainment suites, the true cause and propagators of this filth, not the young gangsters in the streets who are exploited, are merely the victims of the converging malevolent forces.
The Commission has concluded that a properly regulated system of legal immigration is in the national interest of the United States. I urge the Congress to adopt tough policies needed to verify employment authorization. What the Commission is concerned about are the unskilled workers in our society in an age in which unskilled workers have far too few opportunities open to them. When immigrants are less well-educated and less skilled, they may pose economic hardships for the most vulnerable of Americans, particularly those who are unemployed or underemployed. And the Commission sees no justification to the continued entry of unskilled foreign workers unless the rationale for their admission otherwise serves a significant national interest, as does the admission of nuclear family members and refugees.
There's a lot of talk about what's happening here, and there are only two negatives that the press can bring up. And those two negatives are Farrakhan and the exclusion of women. And both of those are ridiculous to even consider, because I didn't come here for Minister Farrakhan. I came here because for years, what has been happening in America is that black men have not been standing together. If a year ago, if you had told me that black men were going to come together and be as many as they are here, or even half this many, I'd have told you you're dreaming. Never are black men going to ever come together and do anything positive like this. It was one of my dreams, but I didn't think it would happen. And now look at this.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will to the best of my ability.
And will to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
It was, and still is, a proud moment for America. The outgoing and incoming Secretary of State are both American blacks. My, how times have changed. Hello, I'm Armstrong Williams, and welcome to TV1's On Point. Today, we share the lives in their own words of General Colin Powell and Dr. Condoleezza Rice. This America is historic. Not only is the Secretary of State, to quote the President, the face of America to the world, but the Secretary of State is, by the Constitution, first in line to succeed the President after the Vice President. And think about this. The very first Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, wrote the words, "All men are created equal," though some would say of Jefferson that his practice did not match his preach. In Powell and Rice, however, we have two people who have dedicated their lives to public service and have reached the pinnacle of American success. But that path began in very different places. Powell, a child of New York City; Rice, a child of the Deep South in Birmingham, Alabama.
we're taking a look at the life and career of Jay-Z. While Jay-Z may be known for his rapping techniques, he is also a businessman who has his own management company, clothing line, and is part owner of the NBA's New Jersey Nets. Despite humble beginnings, he has gone on to become one of the most successful hip-hop artists and entrepreneurs of our time. This successful rapper and entrepreneur has had multiple stage names throughout his career, and today we're taking a look at the life and career of Sean Diddy Combs. With 2 clothing lines, a line of men's fragrances, a movie production company, and an upscale restaurant chain, it is without a doubt that Sean Diddy Combs has made a solid name for himself in both the worlds of music and business.
This hip-hop mogul is the brother of a famous rapper, co-founder of one of the most recognizable record labels in the world, and owns a farm. After years of success, Simmons sold his share of Def Jam to Universal Records for over $100 million in the year 2000. In 2004, he sold Fat Farm for $140 million. By 2011, he was worth an estimated $340 million.
During the 80s, he was America's favorite dad on The Cosby Show. But the television icon surprised many with the role he took in 2004 away from all the lights and cameras. It was at the NAACP banquet celebrating the 50th anniversary of Brown versus the Board of Education. Bill Cosby delivered his now famous pound cake speech, or what's also been called the Gettysburg Address.
People getting shot in the back of the head over a piece of pound cake. Brown versus the Board of Education is no longer the white person's problem. We've got to take the neighborhood back.
In the speech, Cosby blasted people in poor black communities for failing to be good parents, for spending hundreds on designer shoes, but refusing to invest in their kids' education. The reception from many in the black community was harsh. Others, however, saw it as a wake-up call for families to begin taking responsibility.
For the last 3 years, he has traveled the country, listening to and talking with the black community.
I want you to go back to parenting. You young men, when you get married and you have children, you gotta parent. You gotta be parents.
In this new book, Come On People, on the path from victims to victors, he tackles controversial and complicated issues, such as the plight of the black family, black-on-black violence, high school dropout rates, the need for parental responsibility, and more.
Talking Point said last night the election of Barack Obama has emboldened secular progressives who feel it is their time. Gay marriage, just the beginning. Other culture war issues will also be on display very shortly. These include limiting gun possession, legalizing narcotics, unrestricted abortion, and the revocation of the Patriot Act. But it is the gay marriage issue that has ignited the anger and fear now, including some racial tension. African-American voters turned down gay marriage 70-30 in California. That prompted gay activist Wayne Besson to write an article criticizing the black community. Quote, "There is something particularly galling and repugnant about people who have felt the sting of discrimination turn around and step on another minority. What happened at the ballot box feels like a personal betrayal and the hijacking of history," unquote.
This is awesome. It is with a great deal of humility and a sense of service that I accept and appreciate and thank all of you for the opportunity to serve as the next national chairman of our very proud, our very strong, and our very, very hard-working Republican National Committee. Thank you.
This is Michael Steele, the official leader of the Republican Party, saying this about Rush Limbaugh to D.L. Hughley. Let's put that up if we can. Ready? The graphic. It goes something like this. I'm the leader of the Republican Party. Rush Limbaugh is an entertainer. His whole thing is entertainment. Yes, it's incendiary. Yes, it's ugly. But again, I'm the leader of the Republican Party. That's probably the most interesting part of that. Now, just about an hour ago, Rush Limbaugh responds to Michael Steele. It's good. Listen to this.
It's time, Mr. Steele, for you to go behind the scenes and start doing the work that you were elected to do, instead of trying to be some talking head media star, which you're having tough time pulling off. I hope you figure out how to run a primary system. But it seems to me that it's Michael Steele who is off to a shaky start. Now, Mr. Steele, if it is your position as the chairman of the Republican National Committee that you want a left-wing Democrat president and a left-wing Democrat Congress to succeed in advancing their agenda, if it's your position that you want President Obama and Speaker Pelosi and Senate Leader Harry Reid to succeed with their massive spending and taxing and nationalization plans, I think you have some explaining to do. Why are you running the Republican Party?
CPAC Communications Director Ian Walters at Reagan dinner. Quote, we elected Mike Steele as chairman because he was a black guy. That was the wrong thing to do. He followed up, comment was met with gasps at our table. And joining me now on the phone from CPAC is Michael Steele. Michael, thank you very much for calling in. I appreciate it on short notice. So how did you hear about this comment and what was your reaction?
I was finishing up my radio program on Sirius XM, and it came across my phone. Someone came running up to the table and said, have you seen this? Right in the middle of a conversation I was having with one of our guests, and I looked down at my phone, and of course I had one of those moments where you just go, what the? So yeah, a little bit shocked, very disappointed, surprised that people still in the party feel this way and look at the contributions that anyone would make to the party through the prism of race.
The biggest Mitt Romney surrogate, during the campaign. Sununu called President Obama lazy. Now, you know Sununu. You know him for a long time. You don't think Sununu's a racist, do you?
No, I didn't call him a racist.
No, but you said that wording sends the code.
It does.
He just said, in his opinion, he was lazy on an issue. It wouldn't matter if he's white, purple, or green.
He said he was lazy after the first debate, and he said it a couple of times.
So what?
Well, let me finish. I'll tell you so what. It so shocked the person who was interviewing him. They said, do you really want to use that word, knowing? But John said other things that were troubling. He said, the president wasn't a real American. What is that supposed to mean to somebody? What do you mean he's not a real American?
But it was in the heat of the campaign. He's a partisan. I'm not defending Sununu's choice of words. I'm not.
Okay.
All right?
All right.
I'm not defending it. But I'm saying to you, I know Sununu. You know Sununu. He's not a racist.
I do like the fact that Colin Powell's boss, George Herbert Walker Bush, has endorsed Mitt Romney all along. And frankly, when you take a look at Colin Powell, you have to wonder whether that's an endorsement based on issues or whether he's got a slightly different reason for preferring President Obama.
What reason would that be?
Well, I think when you have somebody of your own race that you're proud of being president of the United States, I applaud Colin for standing with him.
General Powell has been, in his books, quite candid about him using affirmative action to succeed, all right? And Barack Obama did use affirmative action to, be educated and something like that. Do you think that there's any racial business here?
No. Because does that mean that if Mike Huckabee supports you, is there racism? Absolutely not.
I didn't say racism. I said racial connection because it's an identifiable path.
I understand what you're trying to say there, Bill, but I think it's disrespectful. I think it's disrespectful to General Powell. It's disrespectful to the president. You cannot take, especially can't take such a pedigree and try to dilute it to pigmentation and not all the competence of the president.
You don't think shared experience enters into General Powell's
endorsement? You're telling me that if President Obama had not done a good job, that Colin Powell, General Powell, would have supported President Obama regardless? Absolutely not true.
No, I'm saying that he might be cutting him a little more slack.
Hey, how you doing tonight? The only disclaimer I'm going to make for this little presentation conversation is that, well, I'll put it like this. Like Chris Rock says, you got black folks and you got niggers. Now, you niggers know who you are, okay? Don't try to front. You know who you are. I'm only talking to the niggers. I'm not talking to the black folks.
Everybody, you had 1 year where you done steal somebody's iPad. You didn't look at the motherfucking news. For those of you didn't look at the news.
A lot of boys who got the thug energy, anger. Thug energy is normally anger and pain. That's all it is. I know, because I do therapy with them thugs. And once they see I ain't scared of them, then we can have a conversation. And fellas, I want to be clear now. When we go back to take over the community, because we're going to have to do it, gentlemen, you can't expect the cops to fix this, because they started it. But I want to be clear. And I know some of us love our children, but some of our children are so far gone that we're going to have to put some of them to sleep in order to take back the neighborhood. Some of y'all don't want to hear that because you don't live in reality. But I'm telling you, as a psychologist, I'm not going to be able to psychologize all of them on the corner. Some of them going to sleep for God.
I'm saying that to say this. I've never taken a life, God forbid. I hope I never have to. But if we're going to take them streets back, we got to admit something. I'm talking as a psychologist. Some of our young men, we've let them go so far for so long, they're no good to no damn body. There's people walking these streets where we're going to have to put to sleep. In other words, you might have to create violence to end it. It will be a cataclysmic altercation between black men and some of our youth. Most of our youth, we can get them. But there's some of them, they ain't going without a fight. And they're going to have to be put to bed. It's a shame. It ain't their fault. You understand? But you have a population of unreachables. The white man wants us to think they all unreachables. 90% are reachable. 10%, we're going to have a civil war with them. And that's facts.
And I am conservative. I'm not a Republican, but I'm very conservative, as most black people are. As most black people are.
I come to you this morning to talk to you about something that's very close to my heart. And I'm not here to be divisive. I'm not here to offend anyone. I'm here to speak to you as Geronimo talked to a general in the 1880s in the mountains not too far from here, when he met with him at a peace conference, a powwow, and said to him, he said, this morning, he said, I want to speak to you the truth. And I want the truth to be like arrows that go out from my heart and my soul to your mind and your body. And I want each and every one of you to understand what I'm talking about this morning. You can see I'm very profoundly disturbed. I just left Tuskegee, where black folk are suffering. And I'm very disturbed when I go across this country and I cannot find the sensitivities and the concerns about black folk in America that I want to see.
Detroit 300 held their press conference demanding that men stand up and be accountable to their community. Tell Us USA is the only news network to run this press conference in its entirety.
Our message to the gangbangers and anybody else that's engaged in a lifestyle that put babies like this and our seniors in jeopardy of their lives. We're telling you, there is no coming together with you, period. There is no uniting with you. Let it be known from this day forward, you are our enemy, period.
But if he loses his temper, you can be sure that he is determined to harm me.
One of the challenges and definitely one of the reasons we founded this school is because of the minority graduation college readiness rate. I think it's going to take enough people to be mad and upset about the problems that some of our young men are facing. I'm very proud to say at Valiant Cross Academy that we do not have to deal with bullying. One reason is because of our smaller class sizes and because of the interaction. We like to manage with relationships here at Valiant Cross Academy and teach them how they're all connected and that they're really brothers and that they're going to do this and walk this life thing out together.
I'm Saquon Lawrence. I'm the Director of Fathers, Family, Healthy Communities. And our objective is to engage African American children of non-custodial fathers to those fathers so that the kids have better outcomes. When the father's engaged, the kids are better off. They graduate from high school. Girls are less likely to get pregnant. To put it in a more positive way, they go on to be really productive members of their community.
Trying to get in touch, I'm asking why, you know.
For us, the issue really is about what tools do men need so that the fathers can be all that they can be, and then you could stop this cycle.
Rows of minority and female business owners show signs of progress. Most of these small but mighty companies don't have a storefront at all.
And it's so hard for small businesses to get a foothold. So this is one way that we thought we'd help the community. Think of it as economic infrastructure redevelopment.
Shoppers like Lorraine Weatherly found out about the market on Facebook, but she's not just here to shop.
I'm networking with other people, seeing what brought them out here, what caused them to start their businesses, and what inspired them.
The hope that other women and minorities will feel confident jumping into the market on their own, especially this holiday shopping season.
Here with the goddess Ayana, and I just want to ask you a question. What is the benefits of us pulling our black dollars together? How does that help us?
We create an empire when we put our dollars together. When we build into our community, we build our nation. And when we can do that, we'll be self-sufficient and we won't have to beg people that don't want to give us jobs. We don't have to beg them for jobs.
I think it's important just to be able to recycle those dollars and get them back into our communities, because these are the individuals that hire our sons, our daughters, and our church members, for lack of a better word.
Joining us now is Leah Wright-Rigueur, and she's Assistant Professor of Public Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. And her new book, The Loneliness of the Black Republican, Pragmatic Politics and the Pursuit of Power.
Republicans within their own party are really grappling with how do we treat these people? Where do we put them? How do we engage with them? Do we like their ideas? Do we not like their ideas? And it comes apart in really interesting ways.
Welcome to this very special studio audience edition of Hannity. Now, tonight for the hour, I will be joined by a very distinguished group of African-American conservatives. Now, included among them are community leaders, political commentators, men of the cloth, women of the cloth, authors, educators, and yes, even a physician. And we're here this evening to tackle some very important and controversial issues surrounding the issue of race in our society. Last time, I got in trouble for saying African American. You were just yelling. Why is that the wrong term?
You hyphenate yourselves as Americans, but you don't focus on the fact that we're people, we're human, you're American. The left uses the hyphenation to separate you.
Go to French and see
black French or Italian and say brown Italians. We are Americans, not African American, not black American.
It's really self-segregation when we hear this term. You know, when you hear African American, oh right, we're Africans, but or Americans, but a certain kind. We're Americans like everyone else, and I really reject Jesse Jackson's self-segregation paradigm.
First of all, I just want to say that I'm a man, not a color. I'm an American, not an African American.
Left puts people in boxes. The left says we're on women, we're on the black man. It's identity politics.
My big concern is that we're not holding the Congressional Black Caucus accountable. They have been skating by for years as it relates down to their so-called representation of the black community, and it's time for them to leave office. As a matter of fact, as far as I'm concerned, we need to demolish the CBC in and of itself, and they need to work on behalf of all their constituents, not so-called just the blacks.
The notion that that whites have a monopoly on racism is ridiculous. You listen to some of the things that some of the most prominent black leaders in this country have made, from comments that they've made, Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, leaders, White Interloper, Jaime Town, Nation of Islam leader, comments about Jews and so forth. Obviously, no one race of people has a monopoly on racism.
I actually went to college in New Hampshire, which was predominantly a white college, and I recall one instance where I was in a classroom. It was myself and another African-American female was in the classroom, and they, for some reason, were talking about affirmative action, and the other young lady wanted to say that she was in the college because of affirmative action, and I actually took a lot of offense to that. It should have bothered her, and I don't know why a lot of people carry that and are looking for their 40 acres and a mule still, when that's, you know, get over it. We got our 40 acres and a mule because look at where we are today, that we are able to be who we want to be and do what we want to do.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, you know, this lie that blacks cannot be racist is a lie. You look at in law schools, I'm an attorney. When I was in law school and I protested against the Black Law Students Association because they did not want to let non-blacks in, and I said, you were racist. They said, oh no, we can't be racist because we don't have the power. So this is just, you know, a fraud.
That's like Chris Matthews' definition.
Exactly.
Talking with Jason Riley, author of Let Them In, The Case for Open Borders, 6 Common Arguments Against Immigration and Why They Are Wrong. Let's start right away. Economics, fears about economic disaster.
There aren't a fixed number of jobs in the U.S. Our labor markets are very flexible. Immigrants help keep them that way. And it's just untrue that an immigrant coming here to take a job means one fewer job for the people already here.
Assimilation, the nativists are restless. Are immigrants assimilating?
Yes, they are assimilating, and sometimes it's hard to detect that because we're still in the middle of the latest wave of Mexicans. But when you do longitudinal studies that measure the same folks over time, you see not only assimilation taking place, but also upward social mobility.
How do they get the Latino vote?
Well, one way you get it is not being anti-Latino, just showing these people that you care about their situation and that your party has something to offer them other than a sort of demagoguery. I think you make them feel welcome. That's what Reagan did. That's what Bush tried to do. And I think that's who the Republican Party should be looking for leadership on this issue.
With me today, Ward Connerly. I begin because it's relevant to our discussion with your ancestry. Ward Connerly is of African American, Irish, French, and Choctaw heritage. Have I got that right, Ward?
That's right.
I gave a speech in Philadelphia once, and I walked in, and this happened to be St. Patty's Day. And because of my own Irish background, I said, well, I want to get this over with so I can go out and march in the St. Patty's Day parade. And there were chuckles, and I purposefully said, why are you chuckling? You're chuckling at my ancestry. The point is that I don't look Irish, and because I don't look Irish, therefore I don't have the bona fides to claim that as part of my background. That's the dilemma that a lot of black people have, in that society is unwilling to accept the reality of their background, but rather looks at them and says, that's how you look, therefore that's who you are.
And that is flatly unacceptable.
It's flatly unacceptable. It is the one-drop rule.
am Glenn Lowry, and I'm with Dr. Carol Swain. I will introduce her in a moment, but I want you to know that I am a professor of economics and of international public affairs at Brown University. This is the Glenn Show.
Yes, Black Caucus, I'm saying that you have gone against Israel when you decide to protest the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, coming and speaking on the behalf of the nation of Israel. That is a slap in the face to the people of Israel, and not only that, it's a slap in the face to God. We must honor, we must serve, we must protect and the nation of Israel and the Jewish people.
One of our panelists on this program, Glenn Lowry, had this to say about Dinesh D'Souza's book. Mr. D'Souza is determined to place poor urban blacks outside the orbit of American civilization. Their lives are governed by barbarism. They are the enemy within.
Even though the problems of American civilization stretch across the national culture, there are some problems that are distinctive to black culture. A good example for this is the extremely high, virtually parasitic reliance of African Americans on the government.
Parasitic black dependence on government transfers is parasitic. Okay, let's suppose Dinesh doesn't know what he's saying. Let's say he has a tin ear. The point here is this.
Well, Glenn,
if I may just make the point, Dinesh makes the following argument in his book. He says there were certain personality types under slavery: the Sambo, the dependable mammy, the sullen field hand, the inscrutable trickster. We can still find some of those types today, he says. Some of those types are still to be observed today. Which one wants to know? The book did make me angry, and one of the reasons it makes me angry is that it is insensitive.
Hi, I'm Bill Kristol. Welcome to Conversations. I'm joined today by my good friend Linda Chavez, a longtime friend. We served together. You at a higher level, of course, in the Reagan administration, and various political fights over the years. And you've been engaged in the immigration fight, our topic for today, for a long, long time.
The real question today in a lot of conservatives' minds, they go into stores and they have to push the button for, or they go to the bank, English or Spanish or other languages. That irritates people. They see Spanish language signs, they hear people speaking Spanish, and so they assume, well, they're never going to assimilate. They're not going to become Americans. My grandparents came from Italy, and they became Americans, but these newcomers from Mexico or Guatemala or El Salvador, they're never going to become Americans. Well, it turns out that that's just simply not right. And I've done a lot of research, some original research back in the early 1990s that showed the progression. And lots of other people have followed, doing extensive research about assimilation. And it turns out Hispanics are actually integrating, assimilating at a faster rate than some of the immigrants of earlier generations.
You know how I started my journalism career? In the aftermath of the LA riots. Okay? And it wasn't just scary white people holding up their guns, it was the rooftop Koreans. Remember them? This is what unites people of many different shades, and yeah, I'm a shade. As was pointed out to me by that BBC dude walking around. Hey, BBC dude! Yes, thank you for letting me know that I'm not white. I'm not white. Like I said at CPAC, I'm just right, not white.
Kay, going through that kind of an experience as a junior high student, that has, I mean, it has to have a really deep impact on how you think about race relations in our culture and how it's shaped. How did that experience affect sort of your own understanding?
Well, I know that racism is alive and well. I experienced it not only then as a junior high school student, but as the president of the Heritage Foundation as well, even in today's time and today's culture. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I have when I'm working within the conservative movement and within the evangelical movement is to help white evangelicals and conservatives understand that racism is a thing. I'm amazed that I even have to say that. And somehow people interpret that as meaning that I believe America is a racist country. I do not. I absolutely do not. Do we still have racist individuals in our country? Yes. Do we still have institutions that are tainted by racism? You better believe it. And one of the reasons I think we as conservatives have a difficult time reaching out to new audiences and bringing them in and helping them to understand our perspective is because we don't deal honestly with some of the biggest issues in our country. And we have an orthodoxy that we have. And if you veer from that orthodoxy at all, the wrath of the right comes down on you. Some of your students and faculty may be aware of the flare-up that I had when I dared say after the George Floyd murders that racism is a thing and it's real. It was amazing to me that by saying that and saying we want to have honest conversations, that I came under attack in conservative media from not everyone, but some. And so that to me is one of the most disheartening parts of my job.
Integration also took away your leadership. The minute you integrated, what you did, you accepted Newt Gingrich and Bob Dole as your leaders. That's why black leadership disappeared. When you integrate, that means you become a guest. Integration means black people become G-U-E-S-T-S. You're a guest. You're a guest in everything everybody else owns and controls. You're a guest in their hotels, their restaurants, their airlines, their neighborhoods, their schools. You don't own anything in America because you volunteered to become guests.
After the civil rights victories in the sort of late 60s, where black people began to create this identity that we called blackness, it was angry, and it was resentful, and it was separatist. And there was the illusion in it somehow that we would get farther as a separate, unified people than we would by joining America and becoming regular citizens. It's not going to hold out this illusion of group unity as a means forward. It isn't. It's not a means forward. It doesn't do math. It doesn't make money. It doesn't invent things. It doesn't, individuals do those things.
Integration is a weaker form of segregation. Now you're weaker than you ever were. Remember I told you about the strong will win, the weak will suffer, the majority will win? Integration means that you have now been scattered into pieces. You have no power. Power doesn't come from individuals, it comes from the group. You all should never do anything as individuals. Do it as a group.
And Uncle Tom is somebody who has sold out by embracing the white man.
Uncle Tom,
bedwench,
bootlicker,
black white supremacist,
chucking and jiving,
house Negro,
coon,
Uncle Tom,
coon.
I have a coon award over there.
Raccoon of the Year award. Most black people don't believe that other blacks can be independent, free thinkers.
I believe the legacy and the ancestry of black Americans is being insulted every single day. I will not pretend to be a victim in this country. I know that that makes many people on the left uncomfortable.
This country was built by many great black men and women.
Those other writers that you mentioned, they basically all write whatever you think of their writing. I mean, I think some are much better writers than others, but they make their racial identity central to so much of their writings. And soul does not do that, right? Soul isn't like there's no affirmative action case for putting soul on the same level as Milton Friedman and these other major intellectuals of the 20th century. He doesn't write as a black scholar. He writes as a scholar who happens to be black in many respects. That doesn't mean he's not aware of his race and hasn't written about it. I mean, you know that far better than I do. But is that part of the resentment that he's faced as a writer?
In 1987, Glenn Loury, a black economist and Harvard professor, was at the height of his career. Embraced by the political right for his conservative views, he was chosen to be Deputy Secretary of Education by the Reagan administration. But to the surprise of his colleagues, he withdrew his name for consideration, citing personal reasons. Months later, he was arrested for marijuana and cocaine possession. After quietly undergoing drug rehabilitation and coming to religion, he managed to salvage both his marriage and his career. Returning to his first love, Loury is currently professor of economics at Boston University. He continues to spark debate with his opinions on issues. His current work is One by One from the Inside Out, and I am very pleased to have him here. Welcome.
Well, thank you.
What it meant and what happened and how you made the turns that you have made in your life.
Well, I think that, like many people, I had, some demons. And the irony of it, though, is that I was also participating in a public debate about these questions. So, on the one hand, I'm on television or I'm in the magazines and the op-ed columns writing about the problems of the family and the problems of out-of-wedlock births and so on. On the other hand, I am myself not necessarily happily married or faithfully married, and maybe I like to go out and have a drink every now and then. Maybe I like to, partake of a little marijuana, a little cocaine now and then. Yeah. So there was a kind of double life aspect, a kind of hypocritical aspect to the way that I was behaving in my own life vis-a-vis the rhetoric that I was putting out. And that came to a head when the problems and maybe, somewhat less desirable aspects of my own personal life became public.
I'd rather have somebody who's been in business than somebody who's spent their whole life in the public sector, or in the, to put it charitably, quasi-public sector, i.e. Thomas Sowell has spent his whole life studiously avoiding the market. He praises so much. He praises so much. He has studiously avoided spending a lot of time in the free market, rather praising it from afar in an ivory tower where he can't be fired, where he gets 4 months off in the summer, where he gets paid a fortune for doing very little work, and he can have sabbaticals and go on cool conferences, all protected by state power. And this guy feeding off state power, Dr. Thomas Sowell feeding off state power, is really criticizing somebody who's been working in what's left of the free market in America for decades.
For nearly 20 years after the war, except in a few instances, the value of the industrial training given by the plantations was overlooked. Negro men and women were educated in literature, in mathematics, and in the sciences, with little thought of what had been taking place during the preceding 250 years, except, perhaps, as something to be escaped, to be got as far away from as possible. We want more than the mere performance of mental gymnastics. Our knowledge must be harnessed to the things of real life. I would encourage the Negro to secure all the mental strength, all the mental culture, whether gleaned from science, mathematics, history, language, or literature, that his circumstances will allow. But I believe most earnestly that for years to come, the education of the people of my race should be so directed that the greatest proportion of the mental strength of the masses will be brought to bear upon the everyday practical things of life.
Wake that ass up early in the morning. The Breakfast Club.
We got a special guest in the building.
Yes, indeed.
Dr. Claude Anderson. Welcome, sir.
Well, thank you all for inviting me. I'm glad to be here. Looks like I'm in good company.
Yes, you are.
Good morning. You know, you've been a very requested guest. Oh, really? Oh, yeah. People are always like, you got to have Dr. Claude Anderson on. You got to have Dr. Claude Anderson on for years.
Yes.
People have been saying that. Well, you know why? I've been paying them well to ask you that.
Have either one of these candidates reached out to you? Any one of their campaigns?
Hell yeah. Jared Kushner.
Ironically, it's been the Republicans have been calling me. They've been calling me saying, Dr. Anderson, we have a lot of respect and appreciation for you and the things you propose for black folk, your commitment. Jared Kushner, he's right. He's been calling for the longest. Keon West been calling me about almost every other week.
Kanye.
And I have never heard from the Democrats, but what I did now, and that's why I'm coming to this point now, I said, somebody should be doing something for black folk.
All right, another thing that's setting off the critics is you and Ivanka meeting with Kanye West in Colorado.
Kanye's been a friend for 10 years. He's a very, very special person. He's a very successful music artist. He's a very successful designer. He's been very successful at a lot of the things he's done. We were together in the same spot. Kanye sent me a book about a month ago called Powernomics by Dr. Claude Anderson. I read the book. It was absolutely phenomenal. It actually incorporated a lot of the things that President Trump has been doing, and it's something I've distributed more copies to my domestic policy team because I think there's a lot of inspiration we can get from it for President Trump's second-term agenda. So we were more talking about ideas and, again, friendships should trump politics.
Rapper Ice Cube speaking out during an interview on CNN, reacting to harsh criticism about his decision to work with President Trump. The backlash starting when Trump advisor Katrina Pearson posted a tweet expressing her appreciation for Ice Cube's willingness to help the administration develop what is being called the Platinum Plan for black communities. Critics questioning the rap star's motives, noting that in 2018 he released a track with lyrics calling for the arrest of Donald Trump. Ice Cube says he is not endorsing Trump and is open to working with Joe Biden's campaign. Ice Cube says he has come up with his own plan for racial justice called The Contract with Black America.
I'm not going there talking about minorities. I'm not going there talking about people of color or diversity or none of that stuff. I'm going there for black Americans, the ones who are the descendants of slaves.
Y'all can do better than that. Y'all can do a lot better than that. There we go. That's about right.
That's right.
Okay, this panel is going to deal with the issues on how we as conservatives failed engaging the black community and galvanizing that community, and it cost us an election.
For me personally, conservatism is my beliefs. It's where I stand. It's my moral code. It's everything that I stand on and what I believe.
We have to be able to engage with African Americans a little bit better in terms of how we speak to that demographic and some of the things that are said, whether it be through influencers, whether it be through direct party messaging, because we're leaving a lot of people by the wayside who have conservative values, but they don't feel comfortable voting Republican because of how they're talked to.
If 5 years ago, this movement would have looked at black men and said they are capitalists, if they had looked at black men and said that they want to be the heads of their household, they want to be fathers to their children, they want to be coaches to their little league teams, if they had looked at black men as something more than a conservative stereotype and talking point, we would not be here talking about the failure of the last 4 years when it comes to black America.
There's not just one type of black conservative, and I feel like that's where we failed over the last 4 years. We propped up one type of black conservative, and just because white people like them, it was like, oh yeah, we love her, oh gosh, she has her own thinking, you know, oh yeah, woo! But that wasn't necessarily who black, you know, the black people really identify with.
I want to say thank you, a huge thank you to all of the panelists. Thank y'all. Give it up. Stand up. Y'all know this was the most lit panel. We appreciate y'all.
Tony will be talking to us today about strategic plans as he sees them, strategic plans for the 90s. It is a great pleasure to introduce the man who needs no introduction, Tony Brown.
May God grant me the words to speak his thoughts. Let me congratulate the Heritage Foundation for its 3rd annual, is that correct? Commemoration of Black History Month, and I too feel that it is significant that a conservative think tank is embracing a concept of multiculturalism, and I think it's important for a number of reasons. I think it's important because it's an implicit and tacit admission that we all share time and space. Blacks are not going to leave America, and blacks cannot survive without relating to people from other groups. I hope that at some point in the future, all of us in America come to our common senses and understand that whether we like it or not, we're going to have to mutually relate to one another. And based on that statement, I would like to offer a premise with regard to the conservative community / the white community and the black community. We should, I think, as Americans, focus on those things that we have in common. The things that we do not have in common frequently are the results of a unique background or circumstances beyond our control. We should not expect all Americans to be Americans in the same way, but we should expect all Americans to adhere to a fundamental set of values and a philosophy that means that whatever we do as individuals or as respective groups is good for the whole.
as you're making these arguments now, Larry, and this is the point I don't know that you ever understand, or not you, but black conservatives also do not understand. When you sit on a national television show and your entire diatribe, the entire talk show, you pontificate ad nauseum about the black crisis, about the black struggle. I ain't heard you say nothing yet challenging about white people, and that's what most folks get from you every day on the radio.
That's my
Larry.
second chapter, Tavis. We haven't gotten to it. My second chapter has to do with white condescension.
Right.
And the point behind my whole book, Tavis, the first two chapters, is not that the majority of blacks are racist. They're not. Nor that the majority of whites are racist.
Okay.
They're not.
All right.
But to the extent that there is racism in the country, there's a great deal of racism coming out of the black community. When Jesse Jackson refers to Jews as Jaime and New York as Jaime Town, when Spike Lee says he doesn't like interracial couples and when he sees one he gives them visual daggers, when Al Sharpton refers to Jews as diamond merchants, we got a problem here.
A quick word about how I got into talk radio before I get into talking about the topic. I got into it quite by accident. I think that's the way most people get into talk radio. I don't think anybody goes to talk radio school and then applies for a job and gets a job. I was writing op-ed pieces for the newspaper in Cleveland where I used to live. I'm from LA, but I lived in Cleveland for 17 years. And every now and then one would get published. And I published one where I talked about how big government was, how intrusive government was, how taxes were too high, and that racism no longer remains a major problem in America. I get a phone call from a producer of a talk show. They didn't care about what I said about government, about taxes. They wanted to talk about what I said about racism. You really don't think racism is a major problem in America anymore? And I said, no, I don't. Great, my guy wants to talk to you. So I spent an hour on that radio show, and Cleveland is 50% black, so most of the callers were black. And I was called an Uncle Tom, a bootlicking Uncle Tom, a bug-eyed, foot-shuffling, bootlicking Uncle Tom, an Oreo, as in brown on the outside, white on the inside, coconut, same concept. I was called the Antichrist, and then someone called and used a word that probably is the most offensive word anybody can use towards a black person. I was called Republican. A man can only take so much. So I get back to my office, I vowed I would never do this again, and the station manager calls me. I heard you today. You did? Oh, you were amazing. I was. You were funny. You said things that were clever. You have controversial positions. You defended them without losing your temper. Have you ever thought about doing talk radio? And I said, no. He said, I have a guy who's going on vacation next week. I was going to get a pro to sit in for him, but I'd like you to do it. Will you consider it? And I said, no. And he said, why? I said, what little I know about talk radio, it seems like a pretty kind of silly thing to do. I don't like yelling at people. I don't like being yelled back at, and so I'm not interested. He said, are you married? At the time I was. He said, do me a favor, go home to your wife and talk to her about this opportunity, and then come back. I think you're going to have a different perspective. I said, I doubt it, but I'll talk with her about it. So I went home and I talked to my then wife, Cindy, about it, and she said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, what little I know about talk radio is it seems shallow, glib, and stupid. She said, it is. You'd be good at it.
Hey everybody, what's up fam? This is Tree from treeoflogic.com. You see this t-shirt I'm wearing right now? How does it make you feel? Amused, angry, proud, or ashamed? I wore this t-shirt for two reasons. One, to troll the left and send them into a triggering frenzy. And two, to show white people that they are the ones being targeted, not blacks.
I think what you did was very damaging about saying that, yes, we have white privilege. I want more of white privilege. I, as a black woman, have more privilege than you. And for you to confirm the illogical rhetoric that is spewed by the left was just damaging. You don't see it that way?
You will see that the people on the left who love to call everybody else a racist are more racist than the KKK, the Aryan Nation, and the Nazis put together.
I have to prove that I'm no longer a conservative. I don't want to be referred to as a black conservative because I am for some reason, white Republicans and white conservatives consider me their property. And I'm about to do something. This is why I'm so nervous. I'm about to give black people on the left and the center the ammunition to fight these racist ass people and their dog slaves when they keep coming after you talking about some get off the Democratic plantation. Please share this video when it's finished. Give me some time. It's going to do the presentation and then I'm going to let it process, and when it uploads, share it with the black community. Share it with pro-blacks. They can use it. They can still call me a coon. I'm still going to be their coon. And I am a coon, okay? Fine. I'll be the coon. I'll be the coon, the bad witch, the mammy, all these things. I am these things, but I'm not a liar. And when I look at the blacks on the left, I look at you in envy because you get to be black. You get to be yourself. You get to say what you want, even if you disagree with each other. White liberals will never do to you what the white conservatives do to me. Hashtag not all. But every white person, and if you want to come for me, do it. I've been fighting you guys for 2 years now. Every white person who supports Candace Owens fits this narrative. Everyone, every last one of them. They're bigots. They have low expectations for blacks. They're racist. They feel like that all blacks should think alike, dress alike. Do you know these people told me that I need to get a better weave because this one looks a little bit unkept? I'm still going to make the video, and I got lots of receipts to prove everything I'm saying. I can't even wear my natural hair. This is my hair. This is not a weave. I'm told that I sound like I'm from the jungle. I'm constantly called all kinds of names. And we'll get into that in a minute. But white liberals, regardless of how these racist white conservatives keep accusing them being on the plantation, I, as a right-winger who's now independent, look at them and go, wow, at least they get to be black. Wow, at least they get to wear their natural hair. At least they can disagree with what's being done on the Democratic side, and white people don't call them derogatory names like gorilla, she-boon, African negress. There's a new one now. Congo monkey. So I have to burn this bridge so that we have documentation that I'm no longer a conservative. I'm independent now.
How y'all doing?
I've never seen so many good-looking people with MAGA hats on.
Yeah, we represent. Yeah. We're changing. We're changing the identity of the MAGA hat. See, people want to say racism and all this other stuff.
They'll freak out. When
But if you sit down and talk to somebody with a MAGA hat,
the great Candace Owens.
You made some nice statements inside about ways that blacks ought to be thinking. How are they getting to hear your message?
Actually, at this kind of time, it's really not. My personal message is a message that I get. I guess there are more important or more, I would say, vocal black conservatives that they get to hear from. And those are like when Allen West said, we've all experienced being called an Uncle Tom or an Oreo. And the last 3 years, I've been in this movement about 5. And when I started with the talking points, following along. About the last 3 years, I've stopped. If you see me, I've completely changed the way I talk about these issues. I haven't been called an Oreo. I haven't been called an Uncle Tom. I haven't, and if they do, they try it once, and then it'll be the last time they do it. And I think that what scares me most is that I can really get into these communities, and when I bring them over, when I bring them to the Republican side, when I bring them to conservatism or libertarianism, that they won't be accepted, that it's not safe for them, because they are expected to change everything about themselves. The way we dress is unacceptable, the music we listen to is unacceptable, the movies we like are unacceptable. So if you want to be a part of this movement, then you have to change everything about who you are. And to me, that is not a safe place to bring people, because you can give them liberty and you can give them freedom without taking away their culture. And I think too many on the right would rather take away their culture as a price for liberty, and I do not agree with that or appreciate it.
How strong is the alternative black conservative movement that you're inviting people to join you in?
We are growing in leaps and bounds. I have since I've started doing it differently, I'm having a lot of younger blacks come up and say, I can't believe you said that. I didn't know you could say that. I didn't know you could say I'm black and I'm proud and still be accepted in this movement. I say it in front of a group of white conservatives or libertarians and get a standing ovation. They are starting to see that it is not only possible, but that it is completely necessary that we make sure we know who we're marketing to. We don't need the choir to sing for us. We're time now that we have to go outside and get other people, and that means we have to change our tactics.
I'm a little wary of the idea that we should think of that as a microcosm for what should happen for Black America, because, not because I'm against reparations, but because reparations for Black America already happened, starting in the late 60s. Affirmative action was reparations. People didn't use that word, but that's precisely what it was.
We need to focus on wealth creation and wealth generation. And to do that, we must bring the descendants of slaves into equality with this nation. And that's what I proposed in this $14 trillion proposal, to provide reparations.
What was it that triggered you, Tyreek, that made you say, you know what, I need to do a documentary on this and really delve deep into buck breaking?
What really made me want to do it is because, as we see, whenever we as Black people have any type of project going on, especially with the dominant society, the white LGBT community has to come in and not only piggyback off of it, but come in and control it. So everything that we see now, we're told that Black people, if we do not promote the LGBT agenda, that we're homophobic and we're going to get punished. See, that's the thing. They say they'll label us and put titles on us, but then they'll start talking about how they're going to deprive us of stuff.
California, we had two opportunities to vote for or against same-sex marriage. Proposition 30 and another time when we voted on, I think it was called Issue 8 or Measure 8. And in both cases, I voted in favor of same-sex marriage. In both cases, I was overruled.
If you are the type of person that believes that there's white privilege in this country, and you believe that there's an epidemic, that somehow Black people don't have opportunities because of white people, you got to be a fool.
There is black privilege in this country, by the way, if anyone wants to talk about it. That's exactly what it is. I just say to myself, I read articles, and what I like to do, my favorite challenge is to replace the word black with white. There definitely is black privilege in this country, and they say, oh, you're Uncle Tom, you're a coon. We are, as a whole on the community, not very nice to white people right now.
Black patriarch